The sun had just begun its slow descent over Haneda Airport, painting the tarmac in shades of gold and rose, when Emi Sato and her 6-year-old son, Haru, boarded flight JAL 128 for a short hop to Sapporo. The airport buzzed with the familiar hum of rolling suitcases and distant announcements, an orchestra of routine that Emi had come to find both comforting and necessary. To her, every journey was a reminder of the fragile balance between expectation and chance. As they settled into their seats near the rear of the aircraft, Emi fastened Haru's seatbelt with meticulous care. Haru's small hands fumbled eagerly with the safety guide, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was excited for this trip, the crisp air of Hokkaido, the promise of snow-dusty hills, and the memory of soft, sweet mochi his grandmother would make. Yet, behind his bright eyes, Emi sensed a quiet restlessness, an awareness that, for all his innocence, something unspeakable lay on the horizon. The cabin crew moved down the aisle, their smiles warm but practiced, their footsteps hushed on the plush carpet. Emi remembered Yumi, the veteran flight attendant who had taken her under her wing on a Tokyo-New York route years ago, and wondered if she was on duty today. She imagined Yumi's soft, reassuring voice guiding passengers through every moment, from boarding to landing. Haru, perched on the edge of his seat, held a little notebook and a set of colored pencils, a comfort he carried everywhere, even on airplanes. The engines roared to life, vibrating the frame of the plane like a deep-throated murmur. Haru pressed his forehead to the window, watching the terminal lights blur as they taxied toward the runway. Emi held his hand, feeling the secret tremor of his small fingers. "Mom," he whispered, "what if the sky grows too quiet?" She laughed softly and kissed his temple. "The sky never truly goes quiet, my love. It only waits for us to listen." Within moments, the world fell away beneath them. The rush of acceleration pressed them back into their seats, and as the plane lifted into the sky, their worries rose and fell with the gentle hum of winged flight. Emi closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment's peace. She pictured Haru's laughter in a snowy park, his cheeks flushed with cold, and felt certainty that no turbulence could shake her world beyond repair. But fate, as it often does, has its own plans. Roughly 20 minutes after takeoff, as the cabin crew prepared for drink service, a sudden, thunderous shudder ripped through the fuselage. Overhead bins rattled open, and the lights flickered. Passengers gasped, their voices colliding in a frantic chorus. Emi's heart jolted. She grabbed Haru's hand, her knuckles whitening. A strange hush followed, a pregnant pause so deep it swallowed the hum of the engines. In that suspended moment, Emi felt the plane hang in midair, as though caught between worlds. Then came the crack, a spine-chilling report that echoed like a rifle shot, and the cabin pitched downward. Oxygen masks floated down, and an alarm wailed. Instinct took over. Emi grabbed Haru, pulling him close as their bodies were thrown into their seats. She whispered over the din, "Stay with me, Haru, stay with me." His eyes, wide with shock, saw hers, and in that instant, something extraordinary passed between them, a silent vow of survival. The descent seemed to stretch into eternity. Screams and prayers filled the cabin, but through it all, Haru remained eerily quiet, clutching his notebook to his chest. Then, as the plane broke through the veil of clouds, a blinding flash of light, followed by a bone-rattling impact, hurled them into darkness. In the dreadful stillness that followed, Emi's world narrowed to one small shape beneath her arm, Haru, unconscious but alive. Around her, the wreckage was unreal, twisted metal, flickering fires, and the low moan of the injured. She pressed her trembling lips against Haru's forehead. "You're safe," she choked, though she wasn't sure it was true. Hours later, as rescuers finally pried her from the fuselage, Emi clutched Haru's hand and prayed that her son would wake. When he did, his first words were not of fear or pain, but of a drawing he'd made in the sky, a picture he described in vivid detail, even though his hands had been strapped in a harness. That drawing, Emmy would soon learn, was the only proof anyone would believe. When Emmy awoke, the world was a haze of pain and light. A narrow beam from the setting sun slanted through a gap in the mangled fuselage, scattering shards of broken glass across twisted metal. Her head throbbed, but she forced her eyes open, driven by one overwhelming need: to find Haru. She blinked against the glare, scanning the wreckage of row 23. Seats lay in piles, tray tables hung open like gaping maws, and ribbons of damaged wiring snaked through the aisle. Somewhere beneath a cascade of overhead bins, her son lay hidden. Emmy crawled forward on hands and knees, each movement sending fresh waves of agony through her ribs. "Haru," she called, her voice raw. The air tasted of gasoline and dust. Silence answered, heavy and absolute. Tears blurred her vision, but she pressed on, dragging aside a collapsed armrest. Beneath it, she glimpsed a small orange sneaker. "Mom!" Haru's voice was a faint whisper, but it was enough. Emmy cleared the debris with desperate urgency, uncovering his face. He was unconscious, bruised, but breathing. Relief flooded her senses, and she wept, clinging to him as though he were her anchor in a storm. Minutes later, which felt like hours, the first rescuers arrived. They cut through the fuselage with pneumatic saws, shouting instructions to one another. Emmy offered her bloodied hand as they helped her upright. She refused to relinquish Haru. They wrapped him gently in a thermal blanket and lifted him to their stretcher. Emmy followed, her world condensed to the sound of her son's shallow breaths. Outside, dozens of emergency vehicles formed a ring of red and blue lights. Paramedics worked in frenzied harmony, triaging the wounded. Some survivors stared into space, dazed. Others sobbed for loved ones lost in the chaos. Overhead, helicopters throbbed against the evening sky, ferrying the gravely injured to nearby hospitals. Emmy clutched Haru's hand as they boarded an ambulance. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, panic flickered across his face. Then he relaxed, his gaze drifting to the little notebook peeking from his jacket pocket. "Mom," he croaked, I have to draw." She opened his coat and retrieved the notebook and pencils. Even in shock, Haru's small hands moved with practiced precision. Emmy watched, stunned, as he sketched swiftly. A broken wing, a jagged crack along the fuselage, and a trail of smoke spiraling into the sky. Beneath it, he drew two figures, himself and his mother, clinging to each other as the earth rushed up. The paramedics supervising their care frowned. "Where did you see this?" she asked, kneeling beside them. "You couldn't have drawn it from here." Haru looked up at her with solemn eyes. "I drew what I saw before I blacked out. I wasn't scared because I knew Mommy would hold me." That simple statement silenced everyone around. The paramedic gently closed the book and handed it to Emmy. "Keep it safe," she said. "You might need it." At the hospital, Haru was whisked away for a CT scan. Emmy was left alone in a fluorescent-lit room, her leg in a splint, her mind racing. She clutched the notebook to her chest and allowed herself a single moment of despair. The fear that her son might not wake or that the memories he held would be too shattered to bear. When Haru returned, his eyelids were puffy, but he smiled weakly at her. "I'm okay, Mama." He held out the notebook. "They didn't believe me, so I drew more." Opening the book, Emmy found pages filled with astonishing detail. The placement of each emergency exit, the position of the broken engine, even the faces of passengers around them. Investigators had begun to interview survivors, but Haru's drawings were unlike any testimony they had ever seen. By midnight, word of the miracle artist 6-year-old had spread through the hospital corridors. Nurses peeked into her room, curious. Reporters hovered outside, cameras pointed toward his window. Yet Haru never lost his calm. He simply continued to draw, as though he were translating trauma into lines and colors, transforming terror into testimony. Emmy watched him and realized something profound. Her son's art was his survival. In every stroke, he reclaimed a piece of the sky that had turned violent and silent. And as she flipped through the pages, a new hope took root in her heart. Perhaps, through Haru's eyes, the world would finally believe what he had endured, and honor the promise they had made to each other in that falling plane. The morning light that filtered into the hospital room was pale and tentative, as if the world itself were still uncertain after the chaos of the crash. Emi sat beside Haru's bed, the notebook open on her lap. She traced his drawings with trembling fingers, each line a precise echo of the disaster. The way the cabin ceiling bent in the midsection, the pattern of broken glass that rained from the overhead bins, the terrified faces frozen in mid-scream. Haru's eyes were closed, but his brow twitched with concentration. "Mom," he whispered, "I remember more." Emi's heart clenched. "Tell me," she urged. He opened his eyes, deep brown and steady despite everything. "There was a girl sitting 2 rows ahead. She dropped her doll when the plane shuttered. I saw her try to pick it up, but the next thing I knew, it was gone." Emi nodded, imagining the small porcelain doll, a symbol of childhood innocence, slipping beneath the twisted metal. "Did you see where she went?" Haru shook his head. "After the slide, everything was so loud. The fire alarm, the people screaming. Then I felt something warm and sticky on my arm." He held up a small hand, wiggling his fingers. "Blood." She swallowed, grief and gratitude colliding within her. "You're so brave, my love." He managed a weak smile. "I had to be. You held me." Emi closed the notebook and kissed his forehead. The past hours seemed like another life, unmoored from the calm world that had existed before the crash. They were both alive, but neither would ever be the same. A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of Detective Kawamura, the lead investigator from the Aviation Safety Bureau. His crisp uniform and solemn expression bespoke the gravity of his mission. He carried a clipboard and a pen, though Emi suspected the notebook already held more vital clues than any written report. "Miss Sato," he said, bowing slightly, "I understand this is difficult, but I need to ask you some questions." Emi nodded. "Of course." Detective Kawamura glanced at Haru. "And how is our young witness?" Haru's gaze drifted to the detective, then returned to his mother. "I'm okay." The detective cleared his throat. "Flight data indicates there was a sudden decompression, no warning. The cabin's structural integrity was compromised, causing rapid loss of pressure. We are investigating the engine's sudden failure as the primary cause." He looked at Emi, his eyes softening. "You and your son are considered critical witnesses. Anything you recall could help us understand what happened." Emi swallowed the lump in her throat. He remembers details, things about the wing, the exit door, even the little girl who lost her doll. Detective Kawamura's interest sharpened. "Would it be possible to see your son's drawings?" Emi hesitated, protective instinct flaring. "They're personal." "I understand," he said gently, "but these may be the best record we have of the moments inside the cabin. Your son's drawings could save lives by pinpointing the exact sequence of failures." Haru looked up. "I'll share them." Emi managed a small nod. "All right." Detective Kawamura held up his hand in gratitude. "Thank you." He leaned forward as Emi opened the notebook. Haru turned the page to a new sketch. The angle of the wing relative to the fuselage, the precise position of the window that blew out, and the cascading oxygen masks dangling like inverted icicles. The detective's pen raced across his notepad. "Remarkable," he murmured, "at 6 years old." Haru looked at Emi and whispered, "I want to help." Emi squeezed his hand. "You are helping." As the detective departed with the notebook in hand, Emi felt a tremor of pride. Her son, shaken but unbroken, had become the voice of truth amid the wreckage. Yet she also felt the weight of his burden, carrying memories too heavy for a child. witnessing horrors that no adult should endure. After the door closed, they sat together in a charged silence. Haru's breath was steady now, but his expression was thoughtful, as though he were piecing together fragments of a dream. "Mom," he said softly, "will the little girl find her doll?" Emi's throat tightened. "We'll do everything we can to find her." He nodded, then closed his eyes. "Good." Emi watched him sleep, the gentle rise and fall of his chest, a fragile promise of his survival. She stroked his hair and whispered a vow into the hush of the room. To be his protector, to bear the weight of his memories until he could carry them himself, and to ensure that the world never forgot the day the sky went quiet. The next morning, as sunlight crept through the hospital blinds, Emi found herself standing in a quiet corridor outside Haru's room, the notebook clutched tightly to her chest. Detective Kawamura had left for the crash site with Haru's drawings, promising to return with any news. Yet Emi felt restless. She could not sit idle while the little girl and her doll remained missing. She knelt beside Haru's bed. "Sweetheart, would you like to come with me to the crash site tomorrow?" Haru looked up from his notebook, where he was sketching a cluster of emergency lights. "Will I be safe?" Emi brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "I promise I'll keep you safe." His eyes danced with determination. "Okay." That evening, they returned to the airport grounds, escorted by a small team from the Aviation Safety Bureau. The wreckage had been cordoned off, but Emi's credentials allowed her and Haru to pass through. Outside the airplane's shattered fuselage, a hush fell over them, a sacred, somber silence broken only by the distant hum of machinery and the occasional cry of a seagull overhead. Haru studied the wreckage with grave intensity. "This is where I saw the girl," he said, pointing to a patch of scorched earth near the wing's crumpled tip. Emi shivered, recalling the violent tremor that had thrown them into darkness. They moved slowly, picking their way around debris. Emi spotted a small, white object half buried in ash. She knelt and brushed away soot with trembling fingers, revealing a broken porcelain doll head, its glass eyes dull but intact. Haru gasped. "She dropped her doll here," he whispered. Emi felt tears prick her eyelids. The doll, battered yet recognizable, seemed to embody the fragility of childhood itself. She examined it carefully, then handed it to Haru. He cradled it respectfully. "Mom, can we fix her?" Emi nodded. "We'll do our best." Behind them, Detective Kawamura approached. "You found it," he said softly. Haru held the doll up to the detective. "Can you help me find the rest of her?" The detective glanced at Emi, then back at Haru. "We will continue to search the wreckage and interview survivors. Your drawing helped us know where to look." Haru's small smile was triumphant. "Then I'll draw more tomorrow." Emi wrapped an arm around her son as they stood in the fading light. Between the twisted metal and the wrecked memories, a slender thread of hope had emerged. The search for a lost doll, a symbol of innocence shattered and, perhaps, someday restored. By the third day after the crash, word of Haru's sky drawings had seeped through hospital corridors and into newsrooms across Tokyo. Reporters arrived in small clusters, cameras and microphones at the ready, anxious to capture the story of the 6-year-old miracle artist who, against every expectation, had survived unscathed. Yet, when they first heard that his testimony came in crayon and scribbled pencil, many dismissed it as a cute novelty rather than vital evidence. Emi awoke before dawn, her heart fluttering with both pride and apprehension. Today, Haru would be moved to a private consultation room, away from the crush of media, to be interviewed by aviation engineers and structural experts. They intended to compare his sketches with their technical models and flight recorder data. Emi dressed him in a fresh kimono print shirt, wanting him to feel both comfortable and dignified. In the hospital's media center, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, illuminating rows of empty chairs and stacked cartons of bottled water. Behind the glass, camera crews arranged tripods, writers huddled over laptops, and an announcer conducted a live feed, her voice crisp. We await confirmation from the Aviation Safety Bureau regarding the potential impact of these drawings on the official investigation. Emmy squeezed Haru's hand as a nurse led them through a side corridor. Haru clutched his notebook to his chest, its pages now encased in a clear plastic sleeve. He looked into his mother's eyes and offered a shy smile. "I'm a little scared." Emmy bent down and whispered, "You're my brave boy. Just tell them what you saw." They entered a small conference room, furnished with a long table and 10 folding chairs. At the head sat Dr. Ishikawa, the Bureau's chief structural engineer, his gray hair combed back, spectacles perched low on his nose. Beside him, an airline pilot in uniform studied Haru with soft, curious eyes. A large monitor on the wall displayed a computer-generated cross-section of the aircraft's fuselage. "Good morning, Haru," Dr. Ishikawa began, his voice warm. "Thank you for meeting with us." Haru nodded and carefully laid his notebook on the table. Emmy took the seat beside him, ready to shield him from any sudden glare of questioning. The pilot leaned forward. "Haru, could you show us where the cabin lost its pressure?" Haru opened to the page numbered #7, tracing the jagged outline of a breached roof panel. "Here," he said, pointing to a zigzag line above the left window. "I saw a bright flash like lightning, and then all the masks dropped." The engineering team exchanged glances as they overlaid Haru's sketch with the digital model. The exact same panel, 14 feet aft of the nose, was shown to have failed in the data. Dr. Ishikawa's eyes widened. "Incredible," he breathed. "This matches our recorded decompression point to within inches." A murmur rippled through the room. Reporters gathered at the glass, their lenses focusing on the notebook pages. One cameraman stepped forward and filmed Haru's drawing, his young face reflected in the glass. Emmy's stomach clenched. She rose. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady but firm. "My son is still a child. He's not here for television." Dr. Ishikawa held up a hand. "Please, Mrs. Sato, we respect Haru's privacy, but I must say, without your son's drawings, our investigation would be incomplete. The data told us what happened, but he's shown us how it looked from inside." Haru watched the exchange, then spoke quietly. "I just drew what I saw so everyone would believe me." His voice, small but unwavering, echoed through the hushed room. At that moment, the room's mood shifted. The journalists behind the glass lowered their cameras, the engineers nodded in renewed respect, and Emmy felt a swell of gratitude for her son's courage. Over the next hour, Haru continued to turn pages. The fallen overhead bin that struck the galley door, the random pattern of cracked windows, even the precise tilt of the left engine as it sputtered. With each sketch, he dismantled the skepticism that had greeted him. What began as an offbeat human interest story transformed into a compelling, technically accurate eyewitness account. When the meeting ended, Dr. Ishikawa presented Haru with a small metal pin in the shape of an airplane wing. "For the bravest witness we've ever met," he said, smiling. Haru's eyes lit up as he accepted it, slipping it into his pocket. Back in Emmy's arms, Haru sighed with relief. "They're going to use my drawings?" Emmy hugged him tightly. "Yes, my love. Thanks to you, they'll know exactly what happened." Outside the room, the reporters dispersed quietly. The announcer's voice softened. Truly an extraordinary story of survival and truth. As they walked back to Haru's ward, Emmy looked down at her son's exhausted but triumphant face. The world had finally begun to listen to the child whose drawings spoke louder than any witness statement.
In those crayon-scrawled pages lay a testament not only to a disaster, but to the indomitable spirit of a 6-year-old boy and a mother's unwavering belief in him. By the 5th day after the crash, Haneda Airport's usually ordered calm had shifted to an uneasy hush. Though the wreckage had been removed, the tarmac still bore the scars of Flight JL-128's violent end. Skid marks etched into the concrete, charred patches where emergency crews had battled fires, and the lingering scent of jet fuel that hung in the air like a stubborn memory. Emi and Haru arrived before dawn, guided through secured zones by members of the Aviation Safety Bureau. Today's task was to meet survivors whose testimonies, combined with Haru's drawings, could fill in the final gaps of that fateful flight's last minutes. Emi walked beside her son, hand in hand, marveling at his courage. Every step he took across the silent expanse of tarmac echoed with purpose. To bear witness, to make sure the truth of what happened inside that plane was neither forgotten nor distorted. They first encountered Mr. Nakamura, a middle-aged salaryman who had been seated just 3 rows ahead of Emi and Haru. His face was weary, lines etched deep from the ordeal. Yet when he saw the little boy approach, his expression softened. "Haru," he said, kneeling to the boy's level, "your drawings saved us. They showed me where to climb when the cabin filled with smoke." Haru offered a shy nod. "I'm glad it helped." Emi watched as Mr. Nakamura described how he'd crawled through a broken surface panel and emerged onto the wing, guiding 2 elderly passengers to safety. With each detail he recounted, the precise angle of the exit door, the stuttering rhythm of the alarms, the accuracy mirrored Haru's sketches, reinforcing what the investigators already knew but confirming it from another angle. That these first-hand impressions were not mere coincidence, but a cohesive testimony of the cabin's interior chaos.
Next came Ayako Suzuki, a flight attendant who had been on duty that night. Her uniform was crisp and undamaged, yet her hands trembled slightly as she extended them toward Haru. "You drew how I held that fire extinguisher, how I cleared the aisle for passengers to escape," she said in a soft voice. "I thought my memory was faltering, but your drawing reminded me of exactly where I stood." Haru blushed and tucked a strand of hair behind his ear. Emi placed an arm around him, proud yet protective. Ayako's eyes filled with tears as she continued, "Seeing your drawings made me realize that, in the midst of that terror, I performed as trained. I saved lives." As the morning sun climbed higher, survivors and crew filed past the small gathering, each nodding in recognition of Emi and Haru's presence. Some shared stories of compassion, a stranger's outstretched hand, a muffled lullaby hummed to a terrified toddler, the echo of a prayer whispered over the din. Others recounted the raw panic of falling oxygen masks and the sudden lurch that sent overhead bins crashing like thunderclaps. Yet always at the center of these accounts was Haru's notebook, a silent testament that connected every voice into a single, unbroken narrative. Detective Kawamura stood nearby, clipboard in hand, his expression a blend of awe and respect. When the last survivor had departed, he approached Emi. "Your son's drawings have given us the context we needed," he said quietly. "With these testimonies, we can reconstruct the final 3 minutes of Flight 128 with unprecedented clarity." Emi nodded, her heart swelling. "That was his gift," she replied, "to turn what he saw into something everyone could understand." Haru looked up at her mother. "Mama, is everyone going to be okay now?" Emi knelt to his level. "They're safe because of you, and because of everyone who helped each other." She brushed his cheek with her thumb. "This is the beginning of healing, not just for you and me, but for everyone on that plane." Across the tarmac, a maintenance vehicle rolled past, carrying investigators back to the control tower. The runway lights blinked off one by one as the day advanced. But in that moment, Emi and Haru stood bathed in a quiet certainty that from the wreckage of tragedy, a community had emerged, bound together by shared witness and compassion. Haru opened his notebook to a new blank page.
"There's more to draw," he said, determination shining in his eyes.
Emmy smiled. "And we will, together." Dusk settled over the city as Emmy and Haru prepared to return to the crash investigation headquarters. The day's light had faded into a cool violet sky, and the street lamps along the deserted avenue flickered on one by one. Emmy tucked Haru's drawing kit into her satchel, the familiar weight of colored pencils and his notebook a comforting presence. Though Haru had drawn tirelessly for days, tonight they would meet with a team of psychologists and child specialists, professionals tasked with ensuring that his extraordinary contributions did not come at the cost of his mental well-being. Inside the headquarters' glass-fronted lobby, a reception desk stood under an abstract mural depicting flight paths radiating from Tokyo. The receptionist directed them toward Conference Room 3B. As Emmy guided Haru down the hallway, their footsteps echoed. The contrast between the sterile corridors and the emotional turmoil they had endured was palpable. Here, the world felt calm, almost oblivious to the devastation etched in Emmy's memories. They entered a softly lit room furnished with low chairs arranged in a semicircle. At the center sat Dr. Tanaka, a child psychologist with kind eyes behind thin-framed glasses. Beside her stood Mrs. Fujimoto, a specialist in trauma recovery. Both offered warm, reassuring smiles as Emmy and Haru took their seats. "Thank you for coming," Dr. Tanaka began in a gentle voice. "Haru, you've been incredibly brave. We want to talk with you about how you're feeling." Haru shifted in his chair, his small hands clasped in his lap. Emmy squeezed his shoulder supportively. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. Dr. Tanaka turned to Emmy. "Mrs. Sato, we want to ensure Haru's emotional health. His drawings have been invaluable, but we must be certain he's not reliving trauma each time he sketches." Emmy nodded. "I understand." Dr. Tanaka faced Haru. "Do you like drawing?" Haru looked up, eyes earnest. "Yes, drawing helps me remember, and helps others know what happened, so it doesn't happen again." Mrs. Fujimoto leaned forward. "That's a wonderful perspective, but sometimes remembering can be hard. Do you ever feel scared when you draw?" The question hung in the air. After a pause, Haru's small voice answered, "Sometimes my hand shakes, but then I think of Mommy holding me, and I'm not scared." Emmy's chest tightened as pride mingled with concern. Dr. Tanaka made a note. "That's very brave, Haru. It's important to feel safe when you draw. If at any time it feels too much, tell us and we'll take a break." Haru nodded bravely. The professionals spent the next hour guiding him through gentle art-based therapy, asking him to draw positive images: the sun rising over Mount Fuji, the warm embrace of his grandmother, the laughter of friends playing in the park. As he sketched, his strokes became lighter, more fluid. He drew himself soaring above the clouds, holding a giant paintbrush, as though through art he could transform fear into flight. Emmy watched, tears glistening in her eyes. She realized how few opportunities a child like Haru had to simply be a boy, to draw cartoons, superheroes, or fields of flowers, unconnected to tragedy. Once the session ended, Dr. Tanaka offered them both a folder of worksheets and resources to support Haru's ongoing recovery: breathing exercises, parent-child drawing prompts, and local support groups for families affected by disasters. As they left the building, Emmy folded the materials into her bag. Outside, the night air was crisp with the promise of rain. Haru looked up at his mother. "Did that help?" Emmy knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Yes, my love, it helped you remember happy things." He smiled shyly. "Tomorrow, can I draw the cherry blossoms?" "You can draw anything you'd like," Emmy promised. Later that evening, back in their small apartment, Emmy watched Haru at the low table by the window. Moonlight glinted off his notebook as he sketched delicate petals drifting across a pale sky.
His lines were soft, hopeful, nothing like the jagged chaos of earlier pages. Emmy moved to stand behind him, her heart full. In those gentle strokes, she saw not only her son's resilience, but the capacity of art to heal. The drawings of broken wings and shattered glass had borne witness to tragedy. Now, blossoms and moonbeams bore witness to rebirth. Yet, even as hope bloomed, Emmy knew their journey was far from over. The investigation would continue. The final report would be published. Questions would linger about how a modern aircraft could suffer such a catastrophic failure. And through it all, Haru would remain at the center, a child whose innocent drawings had galvanized a complex technical inquiry. Emmy placed her hands on Haru's shoulders. "Thank you for sharing your heart tonight." Haru looked back at her. "Thank you for holding my hand." In that silent exchange, mother and son reaffirmed their promise that together they would face every fear, transform every memory into purpose, and navigate the long path toward healing, one drawing at a time. The knees of the folding chair ached beneath Emmy as she sat among the rows of seats in the small community hall. Outside, rain pattered softly on the eaves, but inside, the air was warm with candlelight and hushed voices. Survivors of Flight JAL 128 had gathered for a memorial service, organized by the Aviation Safety Bureau and the Sato family, to honor those lost and to celebrate the resilience of those who lived. Along the walls hung Haru's drawings, each one framed in simple white mats. They formed a poignant gallery, the shattered exit door sketched in stark black lines, the whirl of oxygen masks traced in soft circles, the broken wing rendered with meticulous angles. And then a new series of images, blossoming cherry trees, a mother cradling her child, the silhouette of a soaring crane, all drawn in pastel colors symbolizing renewal. Emmy stood beside Detective Kawamura at the front of the hall. He held a sheaf of papers, preliminary recommendations from the investigation, while Emmy clutched a small program listing the names of the 47 passengers and crew who perished. In the center of the room stood a single lectern, crowned with white lilies. Candles flickered on either side. When the hall grew silent, Emmy stepped forward. Haru sat in the front row, clutching his notebook in one hand and the metal wing-shaped pin in the other. Emmy inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of every gaze upon her. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady though her heart fluttered like a trapped bird. "We gather not only to mourn, but to remember, to honor the lives that touched ours, and to ensure their stories guide us forward." She glanced at Haru. "My son witnessed what no child should ever see," she continued. "Yet through his drawings, he gave us the gift of clarity. His lines, each stroke, became the thread that wove together our understanding of that fateful night." A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Haru's art had become more than evidence. It was a map of memory, a canvas on which the truth was painted. Emmy paused and let her eyes sweep over his drawings, now quiet testaments to both horror and hope. Detective Kawamura took the lectern. "In the coming months," he announced, "the Aviation Safety Bureau will implement new protocols for rapid decompression scenarios, informed directly by Haru's sketches and survivor testimonies. We will improve structural reinforcements in the fuselage, upgrade emergency oxygen systems, and refine cabin crew training for post-decompression procedures." Soft applause filled the hall. Emmy felt tears prick her eyes. Even in sorrow, such progress was a beacon. Next, a row of family members of the deceased stepped forward to place single white lilies into a brass vase at the foot of the lectern. Each name read aloud lingered in the hush. Yasuko Tanabe, age 34. Kenji Mori, age 57. Aiko Fuji, age 29. With each lily, the candlelight seemed to burn a little brighter. When the last flower was placed, Haru stood, his legs trembling slightly. Emmy moved beside him to steady him. He opened his notebook to a fresh page and began to draw before their eyes. Two figures standing hand in hand beneath cherry blossoms that rained pink petals onto a winged airplane overhead. A collective breath escaped the audience. In that simple image lay the promise of life moving forward. A mother and child standing strong together amid petals and possibility. Haru drew swiftly, his lines light, unburdened by trauma, leaving behind a scene of unity rather than destruction. As he finished, Emmy guided him forward. Hand in hand, they approached the vase of lilies. Haru placed a small sketch at its base. Emmy placed another. Then, together, they lit the central candles, their faces glowing in the soft flicker. The hall remained silent, reverent. At last, Detective Kawamura concluded the ceremony. May these lives remembered, and this art created, guide us towards safer skies. May the memory of Flight 128 inspire compassion, action, and hope. The candles burned on as the lights rose. Survivors and families mingled, sharing stories, some tearful, some joyful, all drawn together by the thread Haru had spun with his pencil. Emmy watched him greeting fellow passengers, his bright eyes shining with the quiet confidence of one who had faced the impossible and emerged determined to heal. Later, as the hall emptied and the rain eased to a whisper, Emmy and Haru stepped into the cool night air. He slipped his arm through hers, his small hand warm. "Mom," he said softly, "will people remember the drawings?" Emmy knelt to look into his face. "They will remember you, your courage, your kindness, your art. And they will remember what happened because you showed them the way." Haru smiled, and Emmy felt her heart swell. In that smile lay the answer to every fear she had carried, that from tragedy could come purpose, from silence a voice, and from a 6-year-old's drawing a canvas of memory that would forever guide the journey towards safer skies. When spring arrived in Tokyo, cherry blossoms bloomed in perfect grandeur along the Sumida River, their petals drifting like confetti on the breeze. Emmy and Haru returned to their routines, school for him, afternoon art classes and playdates, part-time work for her, meetings with investigators and support groups, but the crash's reverberations continued to shape every day. Now, however, those reverberations carried purpose. Haru's drawings had not only informed an investigation, but had become the seeds of a broader movement for improved aviation safety and compassionate care for survivors. On a bright April morning, Emmy found herself standing on a raised platform in a community center courtyard, surrounded by reporters and local government officials. Behind her, a large banner proclaimed, "Art for Safe Skies, a community's pledge." Families affected by disasters of all kinds gathered, carrying handmade posters and colorful banners featuring Haru's images of oxygen masks, a mother's embrace, and cherry blossoms raining hope. The campaign aimed to raise awareness of emergency preparedness training, to support mental health services for survivors, and to incorporate child-focused perspectives into safety protocols. Emmy glanced down at Haru, who stood beside her clutching his notebook. He had insisted on wearing his bronze wing pin on the lapel of his jacket, a symbol of both the nightmare they had survived and the promise they were forging. Haru's cheeks glowed pink beneath the spring sun, and he tapped the notebook to signal readiness. "Today," Emmy began, "we honor the memory of those lost on Flight JAO 128, and we celebrate the brave hearts who survived. But most importantly, we commit ourselves to making the skies safer and making every voice heard." She gestured toward Haru, whose drawings now decorated the surrounding walls. The crowd applauded as Haru stepped forward. His voice, though quiet, carried across the plaza. "I drew what I saw so others would know the truth," he said, opening to a page showing the broken cabin ceiling. "Now, I draw what I hope: safe journeys, caring hands, and skies full of light." He turned the page to a new illustration,
Rows of smiling children, each wearing a small pin shaped like a wing, holding hands beneath a bright blue sky. A ripple of emotion passed through the onlookers. Friends and strangers alike embraced, tears glinting in the sunshine. Local news crews filmed Haru's words. Journalists scribbled in their notepads. Representatives from nearby airlines and government aviation authorities took notes, promising to review the community's recommendations for child-friendly safety demonstrations on board flights and improved support services after emergencies. That afternoon, Emi and Haru visited a newly opened Safe Skies Gallery in downtown Tokyo. The space, co-sponsored by the Aviation Safety Bureau and a prominent children's museum, featured panels of Haru's drawings alongside testimonies from survivors of various crises, earthquakes, tsunamis, and industrial accidents. Interactive stations allowed visitors to try on replica oxygen masks, explore cabin crew training videos, and draw their own emergency scenarios on digital tablets, reflecting on how they might respond in a real situation. Haru's favorite part was a touchscreen kiosk that played a looping animation of his cherry blossom drawing coming to life. Petals swirling, branches dancing, mother and child floating above the earth in a serene sky. He pressed the play button repeatedly, grinning as he watched. Emi whispered, "People are learning from you. You've changed the world, Haru." He looked up, eyes shining. "I just drew what I felt." In the weeks that followed, several airlines announced pilot programs incorporating children's artwork and narratives into their safety briefings. Soft, animated drawings projected onto seatback screens, accompanied by gentle voiceovers explaining procedures. These programs, inspired by Haru's perspective, aimed to reduce fear and confusion during emergencies, particularly for younger passengers. Airlines pledged to gather feedback from families about how to make safety instruction more accessible and reassuring. Meanwhile, mental health professionals began offering art therapy workshops for survivors of accidents and their families, using drawing as a bridge between trauma and healing. Haru's journey was cited as a powerful example of how creative expression can transform anguish into agency. One sunlit afternoon, Emi and Haru returned to the community hall where Chapter 8's memorial had been held. The staff greeted them warmly. Photos of Haru's cherry blossom scene adorned the entrance. Inside, a new mural spanned the length of one wall. In the center, Haru's two figures beneath blossoming branches. Branching out from that image were handprints and sketches contributed by over 100 community members, children and adults, survivors and volunteers. The mural bore the title, "Together We Rise." Haru approached, his small hand hovering over his own contribution, a simple outline of a plane with petals swirling around it. Emi knelt beside him. "Look how many joined you," she said softly. He traced the outline with his fingertip. "Their hope drew more hope," he murmured. Emi wrapped an arm around him. "Yes, love, your drawing started this, and now, together, we are rebuilding across horizons." They stood in silence, hand in hand, as the late afternoon light streamed through tall windows, illuminating the mural's bright colors. Emi thought of all they had endured: the fear of falling through the sky, the roar of shattering metal, the agony of waiting for rescue, the pain of loss. But now, in this moment, hope bloomed like cherry blossoms after a long winter, fragile yet resilient, carried on the wind toward a safer, kinder future. The morning sun glinted off the glass facade of the Japan Civil Aviation Authority's headquarters, where Emi and Haru had been invited to share their journey with key figures in the aviation industry. As they stepped through the revolving doors, Emi marveled at how their lives had shifted from the chaos of shattered metal to corridors of power, places where safety regulations were born and lives literally hung in the balance of policy decisions. Haru clutched his notebook like a talisman. He wore a crisp white shirt under a navy cardigan, his hair neatly combed. Emi smiled at him, smoothing a lock of hair from his forehead. "Ready to speak to the people who make the rules?" she asked. He nodded, determination shining in his eyes. "I drew what I saw so they can help everyone feel safe," he said. Inside, a semicircle of executives, regulators, and airline representatives awaited them in a large boardroom. At the center stood a polished mahogany table littered with printed copies of Haru's drawings, detailed accident reports, and a model of a twin-engine jet. On one wall, a video screen displayed an animation of Haru's sketches intercut with flight data recorder visuals. A senior official, Deputy Commissioner Nakamoto, rose to greet them. "Mrs. Sato, Master Haru, we are honored by your presence. Your contributions have already reshaped our understanding of how passengers, especially children, perceive and survive in-flight emergencies." Emi inclined her head and Haru stepped forward, opening his notebook to the page showing the breached cabin panel. He tapped the sketch. "This is where the plane lost pressure. I felt my ears pop and then everything went loud and fast." One airline CEO leaned forward. "Your memory and detail are astounding, Haru. From here, we want to ask, how would you want to learn about emergencies if you were on a plane today?" Haru considered carefully, his small brow furrowing. "I'd like a story," he said after a thoughtful pause. "Not just a video of grown-up voices. I'd like someone to tell me, in simple words, what will happen and show me a picture, maybe something fun, like a cartoon guide." A regulator jotted notes. "A child's narrative guide. We've never considered that formally." Emi added, "And maybe let kids color their own guides before flying, so they feel part of the safety process instead of afraid." The room hummed with excitement. Posters of prototype safety cards flashed on the screen, featuring friendly animal characters demonstrating brace positions and mask use. One concept showed a dragon teaching children how to buckle up. Another depicted a family of rabbits practicing walking calmly to an exit door. Deputy Commissioner Nakamoto nodded appreciatively. "These concepts align perfectly with our new initiative, Passenger-Focused Safety Education. We will pilot a program this summer on domestic routes, integrating child-centric materials into briefings and brochures." Haru's eyes lit up. "Will it come with crayons?" he asked, half in jest. Laughter rippled around the table. "Absolutely," said the CEO. "We'll provide coloring pencils in the seatback pockets." Next, the focus shifted to post-crash care. A senior medical advisor described a proposed network of specialized trauma centers near major airports. "The goal," she explained, "is to have integrated art therapy rooms where child survivors can work with specialists immediately after an incident, based on your experience, Master Haru." Haru looked at Emi, then spoke in a calm, confident voice. "It helped me to draw happy pictures after I drew scary ones." The medical advisor smiled. "We will ensure every center includes an art room stocked with supplies and trained art therapists on staff." As the 3-hour session drew to a close, the assembled leaders rose in salute to the boy whose drawings had ignited such change. Deputy Commissioner Nakamoto presented Haru with a framed commendation. The official seal of the JCAA overlaid atop a background of his cherry blossom drawing. Emi hugged Haru fiercely. "You've made the world a safer place, sweetheart." He grinned, his cheeks flushing with pride. "I just drew what I felt." Later, as they rode the elevator down, Emi reflected on how far they had come. Not long ago, they had been trapped in blackened air and twisted metal, clinging to life in the dark. Now, in boardrooms and public forums, their story was shaping policy and protocols that would protect countless future travelers, children and adults alike. Emerging onto the bustling city street, Emi and Haru paused beneath the canopy of cherry trees. Pink petals drifted around them like gentle snow. Haru lifted his notebook and drew a single blossom falling onto a jet's wing. Emi watched him, heart full. "This is your legacy," she whispered. He looked up at her, eyes alight, and it's only the beginning. As they walked hand in hand toward the subway station, the petal-strewn path seemed less a route through the city and more a trail of hope. Each blossom a promise that, from the silence of a fallen sky, a child's art could rise to chart a safer, kinder future in the air. The late summer sun slanted through the large windows of the International Aviation Safety Symposium, casting long shadows across the conference hall. Representatives from over 50 countries had gathered in Tokyo to share best practices and innovations in passenger safety. Emi and Haru arrived mid-morning, guided by protocol officers in navy blazers. Their names were on the VIP list, a testament to the global impact of a single child's drawings. Inside the grand auditorium, national flags lined the stage. Delegates in crisp suits and tailored dresses exchanged polite greetings. A projection screen displayed Haru's Art for Safe Skies logo, a simple sketch of a mother and child beneath cherry blossoms, the petals forming the outline of an airplane wing. Below it, the tagline read, "Witness to Change." Emi led Haru to their seats in the second row, just behind the keynote speaker, the Secretary General of the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO. On either side sat dignitaries from Canada and Brazil, countries already exploring pilot programs inspired by Japan's child-centered safety initiatives. Haru gripped his notebook tightly, nerves flickering in his young eyes. Emi squeezed his arm reassuringly. The Secretary General took the podium, her voice measured but warm. Today, we celebrate not only technological advancements, but also the human stories that drive them. We honor a remarkable young artist whose first-hand account of tragedy has reshaped our approach to safety, Master Haru Sato. A ripple of applause washed over the hall. Haru sat rigid, then allowed himself a small smile as the room welcomed him. Emi felt her chest tighten with pride. After the Secretary General's address, it was Haru's turn. He stepped onto the stage under bright spotlights, cradling his notebook. The audience hushed. He glanced at Emi, who offered an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, Haru opened to a fresh page and held it up for all to see. An intricate drawing of a globe encircled by airplanes, each craft trailing a ribbon of cherry blossom petals. The petals connected every continent, every nation, symbolizing shared responsibility and interconnected safety. "My drawing shows how we're all linked," he began in a clear voice. "If one country learns how to make flying safer for families, those ideas can travel everywhere, just like petals on the wind." His words resonated through the silent hall. Delegates leaned forward, some wiped tears from their eyes. Haru turned the page to reveal one of his earliest sketches, the jagged cabin breach from Flight JAL 128, juxtaposed with a second drawing of a reinforced fuselage panel. "This," he said, pointing to the right-hand image, "is what can happen when engineers listen to what people see and feel. They make planes stronger and instructions clearer." Behind him, the projection screen switched to blueprints of new cabin designs, annotated with Haru's sketches. One slide showed a child-friendly safety card featuring his dragon and rabbit characters. Another illustrated a dedicated art and comfort space in the back of future airliners. As Haru spoke, Emi watched delegates frantically taking notes. Many whispered to their neighbors, "We must adopt this. This is the future of safety education. Imagine distributing these in every language." When Haru finished, the hall erupted in applause that seemed to shake the chandeliers overhead. He bowed deeply, cheeks flushed, then returned to Emi's side. Later, over tea in the VIP lounge, heads of delegations approached them. The French aviation minister praised the concept of children's coloring guides. The Australian Safety Board chair discussed commissioning a research study on art therapy's role in trauma recovery for young survivors. A delegate from South Africa invited Haru to contribute drawings to their upcoming national safety campaign. All the while, Haru remained calm, offering shy smiles and simple explanations. "I draw what I feel," he told each visitor. Emi marveled at how her son had grown. From the frightened child clutching a notebook in a charred cabin to a young ambassador for global safety. She poured him a cup of juice and handed him a biscuit. Across the room, the ICAO Secretary General approached. "Master Sato," she said softly, "your vision is a gift to the world. On behalf of every child who flies, we thank you." She presented him with a small lapel pin engraved with the ICAO emblem surrounded by cherry blossoms. Haru accepted it with wide eyes, pinning it alongside his bronze wing. That evening, back in their hotel room overlooking Tokyo Bay, Emi tucked Haru into bed. Neon lights danced on the waves below. He pressed the ICAO pin to his chest and murmured, "I drew petals, and they carried my message everywhere." Emi kissed his forehead. "Yes, sweetheart, your drawings crossed oceans and cultures. They've changed the way people think about safety." Haru smiled sleepily. "Maybe one day I'll draw stars too." Emi chuckled, "I believe you will." As she turned off the light, she thought of how far they had soared, from the terror of a shattered plane to the heights of international policymaking. Yet the journey was not over. Tomorrow, Haru would meet with a delegation from Brazil. Next week, he'd collaborate on a children's safety app with Canadian innovators. Each step expanded the horizon of what a 6-year-old's courage and art could accomplish. In the darkness, Emi whispered a prayer of gratitude for the gift of her son's vision and the promise it carried. And in that quiet moment, she knew that the seed sown by a child's hand would blossom across skies yet unseen, proof that even the smallest voice can echo beyond the horizon. The dawn light filtered through the curtains of their Tokyo apartment, painting gentle gold stripes across the floor. Today was the day Emi and Haru would return to Haneda Airport, not as survivors or witnesses, but as honored guests at the official unveiling of the new Art and Awareness Safety Gallery, a permanent exhibit curated by the Aviation Authority and dedicated to transforming tragedy into purpose. Emi watched Haru over his cereal, his small spoon digging into soft rice porridge as he recounted the day ahead. "Mama, they said my drawings will hang next to real airplane parts and interactive displays." He paused, eyes bright. "I hope they help kids feel brave." Emi smiled and tucked a loose strand of hair behind his ear. "They already have, sweetheart." She slipped his bronze wing pin onto his lapel, then added the ICAO cherry blossom emblem beside it. "You're ready." Emi hugged him. "You've given them the courage to share their stories." He looked up, solemn. "And together, we'll keep the sky from ever going quiet again." That evening, back in their apartment, Haru spread his notebook on the table and began a new drawing, a collage of all he had learned: airplanes, masks, cherry blossoms, counselors, engineers, and the faces of children around the world. Emi watched him sketch, heart full of gratitude. She reflected on the journey they had undertaken, the terror of a sudden crash, the silence that followed, the miracle of a 6-year-old's steady hand translating chaos into art, and the way that art had rippled across families, industries, nations. From fractured metal and shattered lives had blossomed something new, a movement rooted in empathy, driven by creativity, and guided by the simple truth that every voice matters. As Haru added the final stroke, a soaring crane circling above the world, Emi realized that their story would live on not only in this gallery, but in every cabin briefing softened by a child's narrative, in every art therapy room welcoming a frightened survivor, and in every sketch that turned fear into purpose. In the soft glow of the desk lamp, mother and son shared a quiet smile. The sky outside their window was calm and deep, a canvas awaiting tomorrow's flight. Haru closed his notebook and, with one gentle nod, sealed their shared promise that from the silence of that day, a chorus of hope would rise, and the wings of tomorrow would carry every passenger safely home.